When Clint Eastwood strolled into one of California's most iconic cafes wearing a dusty jacket and faded jeans, nobody suspected this quiet man with a piercing gaze owned the entire place. And what happened next became the most unforgettable lesson in humility that neighborhood had ever seen. She was called Bella Henderson, a name tag pinned on her bright red apron, her auburn hair tied in a high ponytail that bounced every time she took an order. Bella thought she had mastered the subtle art of sizing up customers from across the room. The early morning crowd had just thinned, leaving scattered crumbs on tables and an aroma of freshly brewed espresso in the air. Bella tapped her foot as she waited for the next wave of customers to roll in. She liked these quieter moments. They gave her time to scroll through social media or toss a sarcastic remark at a coworker. Her coworker Danny, a soft-spoken barista with kind eyes, worked diligently on perfecting latte art behind the counter. Bella often teased Danny for being too gentle, but deep down she appreciated the calm presence. As Bella sipped her iced coffee concoction, the door chimed, and a tall, lean man in a worn-down jacket stepped inside. He carried himself with an effortless confidence, the lines on his face telling stories of days spent under the sun. His age showed, but there was strength in the way he moved, like a person used to forging his own path. Bella glanced at him but barely registered anything beyond the dusty boots and the weathered brim of a hat he removed as he entered. "Morning," he said, his voice low and gravelly, as if each word carried years of experience. "I'd like a table. Quiet if you have one." Bella eyed him up and down. She had seen his type before. Older, unassuming, probably a retiree from a nearby ranch or a passing traveler. People who came in smelling like dust often only had enough money for a single black coffee or, at most, a slice of pie. In her mind, they weren't the big spenders who filled the tip jar. She gave him a cursory nod and jerked her thumb toward a distant corner table. "Over there," she said curtly. "It's quiet enough." He nodded his thanks and ambled toward the table. There was no outward sign of offense taken, but Bella, always quick to judge, was too busy pulling out her phone to check the time to notice. A few moments later, she followed him, tablet in hand, ready to take his order. "Coffee, please," he said, setting his old hat down on a chair beside him. "And whatever you recommend for breakfast." She flipped her pen with a flourish. "We've got croissants, bagels, avocado toast, pastries, though avocado toast might be a bit too, well, not sure if it's your style." She smirked, letting the jab linger. "It's also a few dollars more than your typical coffee and donut combo." The man met her gaze calmly, eyes as steady as a hawk's. "I'll take your word for it and try that avocado toast," he said, not rising to her bait. "And maybe a croissant, too." Bella raised an eyebrow, mildly surprised he hadn't balked at the extra cost. "Sure thing," she said in a vaguely mocking tone. "I'll get that right out." She spun on her heel, returning to the counter to place the order. Danny gave her a discreet nudge. "You don't have to be so blunt," she whispered. "He seems nice enough." Bella shrugged. "People like him are usually cheap. I'm just preparing for the disappointment up front." She pulled a face. "Besides, no one forced him to come here." Danny frowned but didn't press further. She handed Bella the plate of croissants and toast. Bella snatched it, delivered it to the quiet corner, and hurried off to gossip with the other staff about the morning's events. The morning rush returned with a vengeance. Business people in suits lined up for espresso shots, chatty college students clustered around small tables, and local regulars sipped their favorites. Bella found herself hustling between tables, half shouting orders to Danny, working as fast as she could while throwing out the occasional sassy comment to amuse the regulars who expected her banter. Amid the chaos, the tall stranger in the corner never complained. He took his time, sipped his coffee, and even asked Danny, when she swung by, to top it up once. Bella noted how his gaze occasionally swept the cafe as if he was studying it, memorizing each detail. She felt a prick of discomfort under his quiet scrutiny. She was used to people ignoring her or firing back with playful comebacks, but his silent acceptance was disarming. Eventually, the crowd thinned again, leaving a handful of patrons reading newspapers or tapping on their laptops. Bella decided it was time to drop the check for the stranger. Approaching his table, she flipped open a small black folder with the bill inside. "That'll be $18.50, she said, plus tax and tip, obviously." He nodded and reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. "No problem," he said, producing a small wallet. But as he did, a slip of paper fluttered to the floor. Bella bent down to pick it up, glancing at it out of habit. She froze. The paper wasn't a receipt or a grocery list. It was a partial blueprint of the cafe, her cafe. She recognized the layout, the front entrance, the back storage, the row of tables. It was a plan that only management or ownership might have. What's this? Bella asked, brow furrowing. The stranger took the paper gently from her hand. Something I've been working on, he said in that same calm tone, though a hint of amusement now laced his words. Guess it's no secret anymore. Bella frowned, feeling suddenly out of her depth. Why do you have a floor plan of this place? He folded it carefully, placing it back inside his jacket. Let's just say I've got a vested interest here. Bella huffed, half laughing in disbelief. A vested interest? Right, because I bet you own this cafe. She rolled her eyes, sarcasm dripping from each syllable. I'm sure you're loaded and just waiting for the perfect moment to show off your big fancy status. Before he could reply, a co-worker, Marlon, the shift manager, appeared, his face pale as he stared at the man in the dusty jacket. Sir, I didn't realize you'd be coming in like this. Marlon sputtered, clearly flustered. Bella gave Marlon a quizzical look. What's going on? The stranger waved a hand dismissively. It's fine, Marlon. I wanted to see the place in its usual morning routine. He cast a wry glance at Bella. Didn't expect quite such a warm welcome from your staff, though. Marlon's cheeks burned. I'm so sorry, Mr. Eastwood. And there it was, a name that stopped Bella in her tracks. She knew that name, and so did the entire world. Clint Eastwood, the legendary actor and director, a Hollywood icon. She blinked, her mind racing. Why was Marlon calling this dusty old cowboy Mr. Eastwood? Was this some bizarre joke? But the look on Marlon's face told her it wasn't a joke. And suddenly, Bella felt heat rising to her cheeks. No, it couldn't be. The man in front of her, older but undeniably reminiscent of the stoic figure she'd seen in countless films, was indeed Clint Eastwood. She had missed every hint. The signature voice, the intense gaze, the posture that suggested he'd played more than one tough hero in his life. And now, he was standing there with a slip of paper that showed the cafe's layout because he really did own it. Bella's throat went dry. She thought back to every snarky remark she'd made, every assumption, and how she'd treated him like a nobody who might not be able to afford an $8 avocado toast. Her heart pounded with dread at the realization that she'd just humiliated the owner of the cafe. A wave of panic gripped her. She wanted to speak, to apologize, but her mouth refused to form coherent words. Clint Eastwood, her boss, though she hadn't known it until now, reached into his wallet and pulled out a few crisp bills. He set them on the table with quiet composure, his eyes never leaving Bella's face. That should cover my bill, he said gently. Then he nodded toward Marlon. I need a word with you in the back, if you don't mind. Marlon swallowed, nodding vigorously. Of course, sir, right away. Bella stood rooted to the spot, cheeks flushed, as Clint Eastwood headed for the back office, Marlon following close behind. Around them, the cafe staff who had overheard stared in stunned silence. A couple of regular customers looked up from their laptops, trying to piece together what was happening. Danny sidled up next to Bella, her expression mirroring the shock Bella felt. Oh my gosh, Danny whispered. I had no idea Clint Eastwood was your boss. He's a legend. Bella managed a half nod. She felt a knot in her stomach, equal parts embarrassment and fear. I called him cheap, she whispered, recalling her earlier remarks. I practically shoved him into the corner like he was some hick who couldn't afford a real breakfast. Danny winced. Well, at least he didn't yell at you. Maybe he's used to people not recognizing him right away. Bella forced a shaky laugh. Yeah, maybe. Or maybe he's planning to fire me on the spot and have me hauled out of here by security. Her eyes flickered toward the back office door. She could only imagine the conversation happening behind it. The hush that fell over the cafe felt heavy. Bella busied herself clearing tables, but her thoughts kept drifting to the office. She replayed every moment of their interaction, wincing each time she remembered her snarky tone and smug smile. She had always prided herself on being clever, streetwise, and able to read people, yet she'd never once spotted the world-famous actor right under her nose. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Bella served a few new customers who ambled in, but her mind was elsewhere. Finally, the office door opened, and Clint Eastwood stepped out, Marlon trailing behind him with an anxious expression. Clint paused, looking around the cafe with a thoughtful gaze, then placed his hat back on his head. As he made his way to the exit, Bella felt her chest tighten. She thought about stopping him, apologizing, begging not to lose her job. But her feet refused to move and her voice stayed trapped in her throat. He left with a quiet nod toward Danny, whose cheeks turned pink as she waved meekly. Once the door closed, Marlon let out a long breath. The staff gathered around him, eyes wide, waiting for some kind of announcement. Well, Marlon began, looking at Bella meaningfully, Mr. Eastwood will be back tomorrow, and he's bringing some of the board members who oversee his different business ventures. He wants a full assessment of the cafe's operations, from the menu to customer service. Bella's heart sank. Of course, it was about more than just her. The cafe was about to undergo a serious inspection, and Clint Eastwood himself would be leading the charge. If there was ever a time to be on her best behavior, it was now. But Bella couldn't ignore the dread that threatened to swallow her whole. She had offended the owner, and not just any owner, the legendary Clint Eastwood, who was known for tough, no-nonsense roles that demanded respect. As the reality set in, Bella knew that the next 24 hours would either make or break her career at this cafe. But more than that, she felt a strange pang of regret. She had always been cynical, believing appearances spoke louder than words. She'd never stopped to think about the human being behind the dusty jacket. Now she realized just how flawed her assumptions had been. The rest of the day was a blur of orders and half-hearted banter. Bella managed to keep a facade of confidence in front of customers, but inside she was a wreck. She wondered if Clint would confront her, or if she'd just receive a polite pink slip at the end of the next shift. With a sinking feeling, she recalled the calm, penetrating stare he'd given her, the quiet disappointment in his eyes. That hurt more than any outburst. When her shift ended, Bella left the cafe feeling smaller than she ever had. She thought about heading to a nearby bar to drown her worries in cheap cocktails, but something stopped her. Instead, she went home to her tiny apartment, ignoring her phone. She had an uneasy night, replaying every moment of that morning. She felt a strange compulsion to make things right, though she had no idea how. All she knew was that her life had taken a dramatic turn, all because a stranger she had mocked turned out to be the one person she should have respected most. The next morning, Bella woke before her alarm, a knot of nerves twisting in her stomach. She got ready in record time, opting for a tidier hairstyle and a freshly laundered uniform. The walk to the cafe felt like a silent countdown to a possibly catastrophic day. When she arrived, the place was buzzing with more energy than usual. Marlon scurried around, making sure everything was spotless. Danny painstakingly arranged pastries, double-checking each label and price tag. A couple of corporate types, whom Bella had never seen, were hunched over their laptops near the bar. Bella suspected they were Eastwood's staff, finalizing reports or evaluating the cafe's finances. "Morning," Bella said quietly to Danny, who smiled sympathetically. "Hey," Danny replied in a hushed tone. "Mr. Eastwood's not here yet, but he'll arrive any minute. Marlon said we need to bring our A-game." Bella nodded, taking a deep breath. "Got it, let's do this." She took her station near the entrance, mentally running through possible greetings. She felt like a teacher's pet preparing for the principal's arrival. A wave of customers arrived, office workers grabbing breakfast, tourists drawn in by the cafe's historic charm, and Bella greeted each with a politeness she rarely displayed. She was determined not to slip back into the snark that had gotten her in trouble. Yet behind her forced smiles, her anxiety simmered. The door chimed again, and in walked Clint Eastwood. He was dressed in a simple collared shirt and jeans, his posture tall and self-assured. Behind him stood three individuals in suits, two men and a woman, carrying tablets and clipboards. Bella's heart skipped a beat as she caught sight of him. He scanned the room, his gaze resting momentarily on Bella. She froze, uncertain whether to approach. Marlon hurried over, offering a handshake. "Mr. Eastwood, welcome back. I've set aside some time for you to meet the team before we begin the review. Should we gather everyone now?" Clint nodded. His expression was polite but distant. "Yes, let's do that." Bella and Danny exchanged nervous glances as the staff assembled in a small circle near the back of the cafe. Clint addressed them in a calm, even voice. "I appreciate the work you've all put in. This cafe has a history. It used to be a neighborhood hub, and I'd like to bring that spirit back. My team here," he gestured to the suited individuals, "will be looking over everything from finances to customer satisfaction. If you have questions, don't hesitate to ask." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the employees. Bella felt the weight of his stare, and for a moment she thought he might single her out. But he didn't. Instead, he continued, "This place can't thrive without all of you giving your best. Let's see that in action." With that, the inspection began. The suits split up, each focusing on different aspects of the cafe. One asked to see the kitchen and storage areas, another checked the cash registers, while the third observed interactions with customers. Clint, meanwhile, strolled around quietly, occasionally jotting notes on a small notepad or whispering to his team. Every so often, Bella caught him glancing in her direction, but she couldn't read his expression. The tension was palpable. The usual hum of conversation in the cafe felt subdued, as if customers sensed something important was happening. Bella did her best to remain courteous and efficient, greeting customers warmly, making menu recommendations without any trace of sarcasm. She even helped a frazzled mother carry a tray to a table, earning a grateful smile. Every small act felt like an audition for her own redemption. Around midday, the cafe grew busier. Lunchtime brought in a wave of hungry patrons, and Bella found herself hustling orders and running back and forth between tables. Her voice grew hoarse from repeating specials, but she kept the edges of her tone soft. Danny worked the espresso machine with laser focus, while Marlon oversaw the flow from behind the register. The corporate reviewers stood off to the side, watching intently, taking photos and making notes. It was during this rush that a customer began to complain about a cold sandwich. Bella hurried over, apologizing profusely. The man was irate, his voice raised, attracting uncomfortable stares. Normally, Bella might have matched him barb for barb, but today she calmly offered to replace the sandwich, throw in a free dessert, and expedite the new order. It diffused the man's anger. As she headed back to the kitchen, she caught Clint Eastwood watching her. For a fleeting second, he nodded, a subtle sign of approval that made her chest loosen just a bit. The day stretched on. Bella hardly had time to think about her own embarrassment, but the memory was there, fueling her determination to prove she wasn't the rude, dismissive person Clint had encountered. By the late afternoon, the corporate team had completed most of their assessment. One by one, they reconvened in the corner booth, comparing notes. Finally, Clint gathered the staff once again, this time in the quiet of the now mostly empty cafe. The suit stood behind him and everyone waited for his verdict. "Well," he began, "I have to say I'm impressed by how efficiently you all handled the lunch rush. The reviews from customers were largely positive. It's clear some changes need to be made to improve organization and cut down wait times, but overall you've done well." Bella allowed herself a tiny breath of relief, though she wasn't sure if she was off the hook yet. She forced her gaze to remain steady, but her heart thundered in her chest. Clint turned his attention to Bella, and the cafe seemed to go silent. "Miss Henderson," he said, his voice calm, "you've shown a lot of spirit today. I was watching how you handled a difficult situation with a customer. Good job." Her cheeks warmed. She managed a nod. "Thank you, Mr. Eastwood." He paused, regarding her with that same penetrating stare. Bella felt compelled to say something, to own up to her behavior. She swallowed hard. She began, her voice faltering. "I want to apologize for yesterday. I was rude and made assumptions I had no right to make. I'm so sorry." A hush fell over the staff. Danny stared at Bella in surprise. She rarely heard Bella apologize to anyone. Marlon held his breath, waiting for Clint's response. The suits looked mildly uncomfortable, unused to public acknowledgments like this. Clint studied Bella for a long moment, then nodded. "Apology accepted," he said simply. "What matters is whether you learn from it." Bella let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. A flicker of a smile appeared on Clint's face before he turned to address the rest of the employees. "I want this cafe to keep growing, to be a place people talk about in a good way. That means focusing on the customer experience, training the staff, and perhaps adding a few menu items that reflect the area's culture. If we work together, I think we can make it happen." He gave the suits a quick look. They all nodded in agreement. Then Clint looked back at Bella and the others. "We'll finalize the report soon, and I expect each of you to keep doing your best. Believe me, hard work pays off." With that, the gathering ended. Clint Eastwood offered a polite farewell and left the cafe, the suits trailing behind him. The staff exhaled collectively, as if they'd been holding their breath all day. Some broke into relieved smiles, others made jokes about needing a stiff drink. Bella, however, just stood there, a rush of gratitude and shame swirling in her chest. She knew she had been lucky. She also knew this was her chance to transform from a cynical waitress into someone who genuinely cared about her work and the people she served. Over the following weeks, Bella poured herself into her job with a dedication she'd never shown before. She arrived early to prep the cafe, greeted customers with genuine warmth, and guided new hires with patience. She struck up conversations with regulars, learning their names and favorite orders. She even let Danny show her how to froth milk for lattes, despite laughing at latte art only a month earlier. Word got around about the cafe's improvements. The service was friendlier, the pastries fresher, and the atmosphere lighter. Customers began leaving bigger tips, praising the staff's attentiveness. Bella noticed how her perspective changed as she saw beyond the surface appearances of people walking through the door. The man in tattered clothes might be a generous tipper. The elegantly dressed woman might want nothing but a warm smile. She realized how much she'd missed by assuming the worst. Clint Eastwood stayed true to his word, dropping by unannounced every so often, sometimes alone, sometimes with a small entourage. Each time, Bella's heart gave a nervous flutter, but he always greeted her with a polite nod. She never ceased to be amazed that the stoic legend who had starred in countless films was so unassuming when he visited. It was as though he'd adopted this cafe as part of his personal mission, to keep a piece of local charm alive. One afternoon, Bella finally worked up the courage to approach Clint while he sat sipping a cappuccino in the corner. She cleared her throat softly. "Mr. Eastwood, can I get you anything else? Maybe one of our new pastries? We've added a salted caramel croissant." He smiled. "That sounds good, thanks." She nodded and scurried off to grab the pastry. When she returned, she placed the plate before him. "I just wanted to say thanks," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "You could have fired me for how I acted that day, but instead, you gave me a chance to improve." He lifted his gaze, eyes kind. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Miss Henderson. Sometimes a mistake can teach you more than years of smooth sailing ever could." Bella felt relief spread through her. "Thank you," she repeated. "I won't forget that." Clint tilted his head. "You've done well. Just keep going." From that day on, Bella's transformation was evident to anyone who walked through the door. She'd found a genuine passion for customer service, for learning people's stories, for making the cafe experience special. The staff teased her about her newfound positivity, but they also admired it. Customers asked for her by name, recommending the place to friends and family. Positive reviews started popping up online, praising the cafe's friendly atmosphere and a hostess who made everyone feel welcome. Though Bella's old sarcasm never vanished entirely, she still had a quick humor that could surprise the unwary. She'd learned the difference between playful banter and genuine disrespect. She no longer lashed out at customers she deemed unworthy. Instead, she tried to see each person as Clint had once seen her, a flawed but redeemable soul in need of a fair shot. In time, Marlon noticed her efforts and gave her more responsibility, from training new staff to coordinating the weekly specials with the chef. She embraced the added work with enthusiasm, determined to prove that trust in her was not misplaced. As for Clint Eastwood, his visits became less about inspection and more about enjoying the cafe he owned. Sometimes he'd sit quietly with a newspaper, occasionally offering suggestions on how to improve the menu. Other times, he'd surprise the staff by engaging in small talk about movies, local events, or the weather. Each time, Bella felt a surge of gratitude, remembering the days she'd humiliated him and how patiently he'd handled it. In the end, Bella realized it wasn't just Clint's celebrity status that made her rethink her behavior. It was the humility he showed, the fact that an icon with millions of fans still cared about a small cafe and treated its employees with respect. That example, more than any scolding, was what truly changed her. In a quiet moment before closing one evening, Bella glanced at a photo that now hung near the register. It showed the cafe's staff gathered around Clint, all smiles, celebrating the cafe's relaunch after the improvements. Bella stood next to him, smiling shyly. The memory made her chest tighten with gratitude. Life had a funny way of teaching lessons, sometimes through the very person you least expect. She never would have guessed that the dusty stranger who walked through the door that morning, the one she'd treated like a nobody, would become the one who opened her eyes to a whole new way of living. And now, whenever Bella greeted a customer, no matter what they wore or how they looked, she remembered that day and the man with the quiet confidence. She remembered how prejudice had almost cost her everything, how humility and kindness had rescued her, and how one of the world's most famous figures had shown her that respect is not about who someone appears to be, but who they are beneath the surface. "I'm so grateful," she whispered to herself, wiping down a table after the last customer had gone. Then she looked toward the corner where Clint sometimes sat, half expecting to see him there with that reserved smile. The chair was empty, yet she felt his presence in every warm greeting she offered, every courteous gesture she made. The cafe lights flickered, indicating it was time to lock up. Bella took one more look around, letting the day's events sink in. Tomorrow she'd be back, ready to make each guest feel valued. Because that was what Clint Eastwood had taught her. No matter who walks through those doors, you never truly know who they are, nor what they might bring into your life, until you treat them with the dignity they deserve. She headed for the door, turning the sign to closed, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. She thought back to the quiet man in the dusty jacket, the slip of paper with the cafe's blueprint, and the moment she realized he owned the entire place. It felt like a lifetime ago, and in some ways it was. For Bella Henderson, the world had shifted, and there was no going back to the person she'd been before. She smiled to herself, locked the door, and stepped into the cool California night, ready for whatever came next. Now the cafe bustled with renewed energy each day, patrons streaming in for the signature salted caramel croissant or the special house blend coffee, staff greeting them with genuine smiles. Bella's story circulated quietly, shared among regulars who had witnessed the transformation firsthand. She used to be so sharp-tongued, they'd whisper conspiratorially. Then Clint Eastwood showed up, and everything changed. Word traveled fast in a town not far from Hollywood's orbit, and soon the cafe saw an uptick in visitors hoping for a glimpse of the legendary actor-director. Most left without seeing Clint, but they stayed for the excellent service, the laid-back atmosphere, and the kind of small-town warmth that was becoming rare in a city known for its fast pace and self-absorption. Bella became something of a local figure herself, a symbol of second chances. She didn't revel in the attention, but she appreciated it. Customers would compliment her on how she managed chaos with a calm smile, how she treated each person who walked in as if they mattered. Younger employees, many of them college students or aspiring artists, looked up to her, seeking guidance on how to handle tough customers or how to keep a sunny disposition when things got hectic. She showed them the ropes with unexpected patience, a far cry from the person she'd been just a short while ago. Clint Eastwood's visit settled into a comfortable rhythm. He might come by in the late afternoon, order a simple coffee, and ask how the day was going. If Bella was free, he'd ask about new ideas for pastries or suggestions for local charities the cafe could support. She realized he wasn't just a silent investor. He genuinely cared. Every now and then he'd mention a story from his past, a challenging shoot in a remote area, a time when he'd worked with an actor who tested everyone's patience, but he never boasted. It was just conversation, part of his way of reminding Bella and the rest of the team that everyone faces obstacles, and respect can go a long way. One day, Bella noticed a small group of older customers whispering excitedly at a corner table. They were pointing to a battered paperback biography of Clint Eastwood, as though trying to match the photograph on the cover to the man sipping coffee just a few tables away. Bella gave them a friendly wave and walked over. "Anything I can help you with?" she asked. The group, clearly tourists, looked at Bella with wide eyes. One of them, a woman in a blue cardigan, whispered, "That's him, isn't it? It's Clint Eastwood, right?" Bella nodded, smiling. The woman giggled like a schoolgirl. "We came here hoping to see him. We heard rumors he sometimes drops by." Bella glanced back at Clint. He seemed unaware of the attention, or maybe he was just used to it. She leaned in. "He's a private person," she said softly. "He likes to just enjoy his coffee without a fuss. But if you want a quick hello, I'm sure he won't mind as long as you're respectful." They nodded eagerly. A few minutes later, Bella gently approached Clint's table and told him about the fans. He smiled that subtle, reserved smile of his. "I don't mind meeting them, if they come quietly," he said. Bella waved them over, and they approached hesitantly, starstruck. Clint stood, shook their hands, and even signed the battered paperback. The tourists left beaming, thanking Bella as though she'd granted them a rare, precious gift. As the cafe quieted down again, Bella found Clint standing near the counter, reading the small chalkboard that listed daily specials. He turned to her. "I'm glad this place has become so welcoming," he said, his voice carrying a gentle pride. "That's what I hoped for when I bought it." Bella nodded, feeling a small glow of satisfaction that she played a part in making his vision come true. "It wasn't always this way," she admitted. "I used to be a lot more, well, difficult." He let out a soft chuckle. "We all have our days," he said. "The important thing is, you grew from it." There was a note of finality in his tone, as if he was acknowledging not just her past mistake, but the entire journey she had taken to rectify it. That evening, after closing, Bella lingered behind to wipe down the espresso machine, flipping chairs onto tables so the floors could be mopped. The reflection in the machine's stainless steel surface caught her eye. Her own face stared back, and she barely recognized the person she saw. She felt older, wiser, more at peace. She remembered the day Clint first walked in and how easily she had dismissed him. She recalled the shame she felt when she realized her error, the uneasy night that followed, and the tense wait for him to return. Part of her still felt a little pang of guilt, but mostly she felt gratitude, because he'd given her a second chance to show who she could be. A couple of staff members finished mopping, and Bella helped lock up. She stepped outside into the balmy evening air, retrieving her phone to check messages for the first time in hours. A small crowd still milled about across the street, likely hoping for a final glance at Clint. She smiled, shaking her head at how life could change so drastically in the space of a few weeks. The cafe, once just a job, had become a place she genuinely cared about, a place that made her proud. The next morning, Bella arrived even earlier than usual. She fired up the espresso machine, arranged fresh pastries in the display, and double-checked the register. She glanced around, noticing that everything looked polished and ready, from the stacked mugs near the counter to the new chalk art announcing a local charity drive. Clint's influence was everywhere, not because he'd forced changes, but because he'd encouraged people to see what the cafe could be. And Bella had discovered something about herself in the process, a desire to connect with people rather than judge them. That day, Clint Eastwood visited again, though this time he wore a relaxed expression, as if free from the pressures of oversight. He ordered his usual coffee and took a seat near the window, where golden morning light streamed in. Bella brought over his cup and set it down gently. "Good morning, Mr. Eastwood," she said, her voice warm. He looked up, returning the greeting with a nod. "Morning, Miss Henderson," he replied. "How's it looking today?" She followed his gaze as he surveyed the cafe. A few customers typed away on laptops, a trio of friends chatted over muffins, and a mother read to her toddler in a cozy corner. "It's good," Bella said. "Feels like we're finding our groove." Clint's gaze landed on her, and she felt that calm intensity again. "Seems like you have," he said. She noticed a small line of worry on his brow. "Something bothering you?" she asked softly, forgetting for a moment that he was her employer and not just another patron. He waved a hand dismissively. "I'm fine, just thinking about a script I've been reviewing, but that's neither here nor there." He paused, then asked, "You happy here?" Bella was taken aback. No boss had ever asked her that so directly. She thought for a moment. "Yeah," she admitted. "I am. I feel like I'm part of something now. Not just pouring coffee, but really making people's days better." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That's what counts," he said. "Keep that up, and this place will keep thriving." She grinned. "I intend to." An urgent shout from behind the counter drew Bella's attention. Danny was waving, trying to signal that a complicated order had come in. Bella excused herself and hurried off, diving into her role with uncharacteristic eagerness. It struck her how much she'd changed. Once upon a time, she would have rolled her eyes at the fuss. Now she tackled the challenge head-on, working with Danny to craft the perfect custom drink for a picky customer. The rest of the morning went smoothly. As lunchtime neared, Clint rose from his seat, placed a few bills on the table, and caught Bella's eye. "I'm heading out. You have a good one." Bella nodded, a polite smile on her lips. "You too, Mr. Eastwood. Thanks for stopping by." He paused at the door, turning back briefly. "And Bella?" Her heart gave a tiny leap. He'd never called her by her first name before. "Yes?" "You're doing just fine," he said, tipping an imaginary hat before stepping out into the sunshine. She watched him go, feeling warmth flood her chest. In that moment, she realized something profound. Second chances were about more than just redeeming yourself in someone else's eyes. They were about discovering you had it in you all along to be the person you'd always wanted to be, someone who could make a difference in a small corner of the world. She blinked back sudden tears, laughing at herself for being so emotional over a simple exchange. But it wasn't just an exchange. It was validation that she was on the right track. With a renewed sense of purpose, Bella got back to work, greeting the next wave of customers as they entered. She took each order with a bright smile, genuinely listening to people's stories, never letting her old cynicism creep in. Outside, the sun shone on the cafe's sign, which now gleamed with a fresh coat of paint. Inside, the staff bustled with energy, each person playing a role in making the cafe the welcoming haven Clint Eastwood had envisioned. It wasn't glamorous or newsworthy in the grand scheme of things, but it was real, and for Bella Henderson, that was enough. The memory of humiliating her boss, only to find out he was the legendary Clint Eastwood, would stay with her forever, not as a scar, but as a reminder that sometimes the biggest lessons come wrapped in the most unexpected circumstances. After all, it's not every day you discover that behind a dusty jacket and a quiet demeanor lies a Hollywood icon who believes in giving people the chance to rise above their worst instincts. And that was precisely what Bella had done. She'd risen above. She'd learned that humility, respect, and genuine kindness were more valuable than quick wit or flashy comebacks. She'd found a sense of belonging in a place she once treated like a mere paycheck. And she'd made peace with her past, stepping forward into a future where every customer who walked through that door would be seen, heard, and treated like they mattered. Her transformation was now woven into every cup of coffee she served, every pastry she recommended, every greeting she offered. And while the cafe continued to flourish under Clint Eastwood's quiet guidance, Bella knew that the real gift he had given her wasn't just a second chance at her job, it was a second chance at herself.